Hello, this is the HARP Report. Have you been wondering about climate change? Is global warming really happening? If it is happening, how bad is it really? If it is really bad, is there anything we can do about it? If there is something we can do about it, how difficult will that be? If there is something easy we can do, how risky will it be? If it is easy and safe, why aren't we doing it now? Who is preventing us from doing the easy, safe things right now? How are they preventing us from doing the easy, safe things right now? Where can we get some answers to these questions? You'll have to watch all of the videos 1 and 2 to find out for yourself. I think you'll find this information to be quite amazing. Video 1 of 2, Ocean Iron Fertilization, The Truth About Global Warming, subtitle Mankind's Last Chance to Survive. Research compiled by me, the HARP Report, October 28th, 2018. Created with Ubuntu. This video, part 1, will explain what is ocean iron fertilization. Just the basics. Simple proof that carbon dioxide is heating the planet. Disinformation tactics used by the fossil fuel lobby to hide carbon dioxide heating. How potent and long-lasting carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere. The absolute requirement for ocean fertilization. Carbon dioxide removal psyops from the corporations and the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is controlled by the United Nations. Part 1, what is ocean iron fertilization? Just the basics. Ocean iron fertilization is the controlled addition of trace, very small amounts of iron to the cold, deep, empty polar oceans, typically much less than 1 milligram of iron per cubic meter of seawater. Ocean iron fertilization is not geoengineering. Ocean iron fertilization is simply replacing the missing iron that would have been pooped out by millions of great whales that are gone now. Ocean iron fertilization will help return the oceans to a pre-industrial state and dramatically increase fish, ocean life, and the permanent storage of CO2, carbon dioxide, at the bottom of the ocean. The cold polar oceans are the only carbon dioxide absorbers big enough to save the planet from runaway global heating caused by melting permafrost and Arctic methane release. 1 pound of iron added to the ocean removes 2,000 pounds of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere for hundreds, thousands, or millions of years. Ocean iron fertilization removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere for less than $2 a ton. Actually, it's done at a profit because of the huge amounts of fish that are produced. Industrial methods of carbon dioxide removal cost $200 to $600 to $1,000 per ton of carbon dioxide, and they are the only focus of the IPCC and the billionaires and corporations. Ocean iron fertilization is mankind's last chance to survive, and you'll see that in great detail later in this presentation. Death awaits our civilization and our species if ocean iron fertilization is not started by the end of the year 2020. That's 2 years away at the time of this release. Without OIF, you and your family will be quietly and safely exterminated by extreme temperature rise over the next 10 to 30 years. Ocean iron fertilization is easy, cheap, safe, and the only way to prevent runaway global temperature increase. But mankind is prohibited from using this cheap, simple technology to prevent runaway global heating. Which humans are stopping us from fertilizing the oceans, and who gave them the authority? A small group of unknown, unelected United Nations bureaucrats is stopping any and all attempts at ocean iron fertilization. These bureaucrats have given themselves the authority to even block experiments in ocean iron fertilization. All of this is covered in greater detail in the second video. Without OIF, the entire planet dies as 20 positive feedbacks kick in all at once, feed off of each other, heating the planet faster and faster. As the planet gets hotter, it gets hotter faster. And you go around and around like in a circle. You and your family will not survive unless OIF is started by 2020 on a large scale. I call on Russia, China, France, or the United Kingdom to begin ocean iron fertilization, as a strong Navy will be needed to defend against U.S. Navy attacks on the OIF ships. But don't despair, we still have a few years to save ourselves. And this is very quick and easy to implement once the decision is made. A former boss once told me, never bring me a problem unless you are ready to offer a solution, which is great advice for all employees. Happily, the second video will show we still have a chance to avoid the global emergency of runaway heating. Powerful leaders must begin large-scale ocean iron fertilization by 2020 instead of waiting for UN bureaucrats to rewrite the rules and regulations. The UN will not do anything because they are waiting for all of us to go the way of the dodo bird as quietly, as safely, and as soon as possible. Simple proof that carbon dioxide is heating the planet. First, let's get one thing straight. Man-made carbon dioxide emissions are the cause of the rapid heating of the entire planet. On the left here we see incoming sunlight from space as this golden bell shape, Gaussian curve. The sun is hot at 6,000 Kelvin. That means the radiation it puts out is at high frequency, short wavelength. Outgoing infrared from the surface of Earth. Earth is cool, 255 degrees Kelvin, and that means the radiation it puts out is in long wave, infrared. Here we have water absorbing. Now the bottom means no absorption, the top means complete absorption of these frequencies. And you can see incoming sunlight is not blocked by either water or carbon dioxide. That's why we have evolved to see in these wavelengths, because they're always available. But for the outgoing infrared, we see water is a strong absorber, but it's not really a greenhouse gas in the way that carbon dioxide is, because water heats up in the afternoon, it bubbles up to make clouds, and then you have rain, it shades the earth. It's an absolutely necessary and positive process. On the other hand, carbon dioxide has its absorption right at the peak of the outgoing infrared going out to space. Here's a more detailed chart. Again, downgoing solar radiation, some of it's in ultraviolet, blocked by ozone here, oxygen and ozone. Here's the visible range that we see in. Look, there's really no blockage here. Upgoing thermal radiation. 210 would be the poles, 310 would be the tropics. So the black curve is the tropics, and look right at the peak of the black curve we have carbon dioxide in this red box. So as the tropics heat up and are trying to radiate that infrared back out to space, the increasing carbon dioxide actually captures this heat that is reflected back to the Earth. Is called radiative forcing. This number was just increased from 2 to 4 in the IPCC Special Report 1.5 released in October 2018. And the other greenhouse gases are methane, which is 50 to 100 times, depending on the time scale. Because also, look, it's inside a clear spot in the water vapor absorption. So it is actually blocking significant amounts of infrared that's trying to go back to space. And nitrous oxide, N2O, has two peaks that are both in a clear area in the water vapor curve. So this is the scientific proof that carbon dioxide is a powerful greenhouse gas. And here's what the IPCC special report from this month actually says. Radiative forcing is now 4 watts per square meter. So that's like having a night light, a little plug-in night light over every 2 square meters over the entire surface of the planet. And also we can see from this chart aerosols, solar radiation management and smoke and you name it, pollen, is blocking 1 watt. Here I have negative 1 watt. So this is what the geoengineers are now feverish. They want to increase this from less than 1 watt to maybe 2 watts, 3 watts. But they're going to have to totally pollute the stratosphere to do that, and I'm extremely opposed to that. This video proposes a much better solution. And I might add that for years, all these climate scientists have been saying that radiative forcing is 2 watts. I've been saying it's been 3 watts, and now here IPCC comes out and says it's actually 4 watts. Another thing to note is that downgoing solar radiation, depending on the sunspot cycle, only varies by 0.25 watts, a quarter of a watt, variations in the sun cycle. But greenhouse gases add 4 watts. And the 4 watts is increasing rapidly with the level of greenhouse gases. This is one of the main disinformation tactics they use, that they say, and this brings us to the disinformation tactics used by the fossil fuel lobby to hide carbon dioxide heating of the planet. So disinformation tactics used to hide man-made carbon dioxide emissions heating the planet Earth. Everybody's favorite, the flat Earth. There's a dome over the firmament. It's the dome that's holding all the heat in. Oh man, whenever somebody mentions that, don't give them the time of day. Either they're too ignorant to be helped, or they're a paid troll. Planet X Nibiru. It's Nibiru's incoming, heating all the planets. Well, we can know for certain that no massive object has ever entered the inner solar system, because the solar system planets are basically round circles, circular orbits. There are no long elliptical orbits in the inner solar system. That means we've never had a massive object come through the inner solar system. Planet X Nibiru is a lie. The sun cycle grand solar minimum, we just went over that. It's less than a quarter of a watt per square meter. We now have 4 watts per square meter. So that is disinformation. Anybody who mentions sun cycle, grand solar minimum, sunspots are heating the planet, walk, don't run away from those people. Totally drop their support, your support of them. Now the new one, it's a sun simulator. It's not the real sun. It's a big ultraviolet bulb in space. Oh, please, give me a break. Now the latest, fake stars are only a few miles up. Are they attached to the dome of the firmament? Wow, that's all I can say. There's an ice age coming. It's the Maunder minimum, and the Maunder minimum was a sun cycle period with no sunspots. That's disinformation. These people are horrible paid liars. Anybody who says ice age coming because of the Maunder minimum and all that grand solar nonsense. Another thing, cosmic rays hit the upper atmosphere, increasing clouds, causing ice ages. We should be so lucky. Let's hope that does happen. But it has nothing to do with our current situation. Just confusion. The heating stopped in the year 2000, and pick your year. It could be any year. Well, the reality there is the land absorbs really only 4%. Land and air absorb 4% of the heat. The oceans absorb about 96% of the heat. So these people that claim the heating stopped in the year 2000, blah, 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 did they measure the oceans? I'll show this in a minute. The outer planets are heating also. I've never seen good data on that. I mean, let's prove that before I'll believe it. Do you actually trust NSA or NASA or whatever monolithic totalitarian information control organization is speaking? I don't. Chemtrails are used to hide incoming Nibiru. Again, total nonsense, and it doesn't even make sense. Most of these cameras that show the Nibiru as a second sun, that's an internal lens reflection. It's just idiotic. Chemtrails do 100% of the heating. It's not global warming, it's the chemtrails. Well, chemtrails lower the peak heating of the afternoon, but they also cause a rise in the temperature before daybreak, because the Earth can't cool itself during the nighttime as well. That's nonsense. Chemtrails are not heating the Earth. We just saw in the other chart they're cooling about 1 watt per square meter. Well, all the aerosols in the atmosphere are, of which the solar radiation management, I'm quite convinced, are a large part of that. Chemtrails do prevent rain, thunderstorms, by creating a warm air layer aloft, a capping inversion. Very disastrous technology. HARP does 100% of the heating. It's not global warming, it's HARP. That's a lie. HARP is used to control the jet stream over the Pacific. It has several other detrimental side effects. HARP reduces the ozone by punching holes in the ozone layer. It's driving a lot of this jet nanoparticle spraying into the atmosphere. Here's one of my pet peeves. IPCC scientists have just seemingly pulled a new unit out of nowhere. It's called petagrams. It's the exact same amount as billion tons or gigatons, but they use the name petagram. Petagram. Oh. Should we use a carrot and a laundry basket to try to catch a petagram for this kindergarten class? Maybe they can keep it in a wire cage instead of an aquarium. Are petagrams good pets? Do they have long fuzzy ears and warm bodies? You know, petagram, anytime you hear a scientist say petagram, they're treating you as a sheep to try to keep you calm. Calm the sheep. Because if you use the word gigatons, that's a nightmare. Billions of tons of greenhouse gas. That's frightening. But petagram, oh, how soothing that is. Anytime you hear that, know that this guy is part of the system that's trying to prevent any real solutions. And wrong numbers from EPA and NOAA. More on this in the second video. The truth about CO2 heating the planet. The fossil fuel lobby is paying disinfo trolls to post on blogs all day, every day. YouTube trolls have no content, no videos, and up to 25 subscribers. And that's the mark of a real troll on YouTube. There is no good science to support any cooling. There is some cool water south of Greenland, but it's due to Greenland rapidly melting because of runaway global heating. That's not evidence of cooling. There is no doubt on carbon dioxide absorption of outgoing infrared. This is a typo. This should be 4 watts per square meter. Any fifth grader can verify CO2 absorbs infrared with an aquarium, a light bulb, and some carbon dioxide dry ice or whatever. Very simple to understand. 95% of the extra heat has been absorbed by the oceans. We only see 5% of the heat in the land and air. That's the real truth. This planet is a water planet. We're not a land planet. 71% of the area is water. We should be concerned about the oceans. And the IPCC they are never concerned with ocean absorption, and you'll see this later. Death of millions of great whales over the last 500 years is partially responsible for the dying oceans. 1% loss of plankton per year, according to NASA. The death of millions of great whales is partly responsible for the loss of the ocean's ability to remove gigatons of CO2 from the atmosphere. How potent and long-lasting is CO2 in the atmosphere? Please pay attention to this. This is the most important part of this first video. When fossil fuels are burned and release 1 unit of heat, how many units do you think the Earth will heat up because of the newly added carbon dioxide over the coming decades? Any guesses? I guessed it was around 10, 20, maybe 50 that the Earth will heat up after you burn 1 unit of, say, gasoline. Let's say this car burns some gasoline. You see the yellow tank is full of gas and releases some carbon dioxide in 1 heat unit here. And now we've burned most of the tank of gas. We'll just call that 1 heat unit. What happens to the CO2 over the following decades? Many years later, the car is rusty, the tires are flat, and this carbon dioxide from years ago is up in the atmosphere with the sunlight hitting it. Carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for centuries. A little known but extremely grim fact. Burning fossil fuels adds 1 heat unit immediately, but over the life of the carbon dioxide, the radiative forcing adds 100,000 heat units to the atmosphere. 100,000 units are added by the sunlight. Carbon dioxide must be removed from the atmosphere now if we are to survive. That is the entire point of the IPCC Special Report 1.5 in October 2018. Assessment Report 5 from 2014 shows carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for thousands of years. Can you spot the mind control? Every IPCC discussion of the ocean and carbon dioxide is full of mind control. Using the word invasion is a disinfo psyop. It should be absorption, which is a natural process and the main way the planet has always sequestered carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and put it at the bottom of the sea for millions of years. Also, they're claiming that it takes 10,000 years for the carbon to be removed down to 20% at the bottom of the ocean. Well, there's an enzyme we can use, carbonic anhydrase, that could shorten this 10,000 years to a few decades, or maybe shorter. So you still have 40% of the original carbon dioxide after 100 years. And after 1,000 years, you still have 25% left. After releasing a quantity of carbon dioxide into the air, how long does it take to heat the Earth? When is the peak heating, and how long does the Earth stay warm from the extra CO2? After a pulse of CO2 is released into the atmosphere, the heating looks like this. Maximum heating happens in only 10 years. But the heat hangs around for hundreds of years. This makes burning fossil fuels a lot more personal. The consequences are not hundreds of years away, not just a problem for distant generations. They're a problem for each and every one of us a few years after we emit carbon dioxide. But on the positive side, now we know every time we prevent carbon dioxide emissions, or plant a tree, or ride a bike, or increase the fertility of the soil by increasing the organic content, the positive results are just a few years away. So now we should be highly motivated to do those things. The absolute need for ocean iron fertilization. This is an old chart from 2015 saying that we were emitting 36 billion tons a year. We are actually at 41 billion tons a year now, just 3 years later. And this is going to blow you away because this is actually 112 million tons of CO2 dumped into the atmosphere each day. Now, if you convert that to Olympic swimming pools, it becomes more easy to picture, but still, that is 45,000 Olympic swimming pools. The water converted to carbon dioxide and spewed into the air every single day. So when these political pundits and paid trolls tell you that carbon dioxide is not affecting the atmosphere, you might want to mention that 45,000 Olympic swimming pools, the weight of the water converted to carbon dioxide, is spewed into the dump that we call the atmosphere every single day. And if you don't believe these numbers, the figures here are at the bottom, very simple. Where is all the heat going? Or where's it all hiding, rather? It's in the oceans. 95% of the new heat from greenhouse gases are stored in the oceans. All we see is the 5% in the land and the air. So the land is this little brown stripe here, and you can see, well, land doesn't really store much of this heat, does it? And the atmosphere is this tiny purple strip. Hardly any increase at all, hardly any changes. But look at the ocean. Deep ocean here, surface ocean here. Holy cow, we are a water planet, and look at what is happening to our water planet and how well hidden it is from us who live on the land. Next time the trolls tell you the planet's not heating up, just think of this chart here. Where is the carbon dioxide going now? On the top side of zero, these are the emissions, fossil fuels, absolutely huge and ramping up steadily. Land use, deforestation, forest fires, converting forests into farmland subdivisions. This is releasing this much carbon in billion tons. Now the land absolutely absorbs a lot of carbon, but it's up and down due to a lot of different factors. Most of the carbon released is going into the atmosphere. The light blue here, you can see it increasing. Now the ocean is absorbing huge amounts of carbon dioxide. Even without being fertilized, it's still absorbing all this. And we'll talk about this in great detail in the second video. Why is ocean iron fertilization absolutely required to save planet Earth from runaway heating? This is the IPCC Assessment Report 5 from 2014. And these little lines here are called representative concentration pathways. And this RCP 2.6 is the only path that prevents runaway global heating and allows us to survive on planet Earth. This is the only one. Everything else triggers catastrophic runaway heating. Okay, from the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement allows each nation nationally determined contributions, NDCs, which from the IPCC special report, median estimates for NDCs are basically 54 gigatons CO2 per year in the year 2030. So I've plotted that on here. This is the blue dot. This is the Paris Accord. This is the big deal that everybody fought to agree. Took, 9 years to agree to this. And we're on the doomsday curve. We're actually much higher than the doomsday curve. So the Paris Agreement is a joke, a political psyop that's going to lead to the extermination of humans and human civilization. Why is the difference between RCP 8.5 is the doomsday path, and these are basically 8.5 degrees of warming, versus RCP 2.6, less than 2.6 degrees centigrade of warming. Why is this difference so important? What's it going to look like on the ground? RCP 2.6, you can see here's the breadbasket of the US. They're claiming it's 2080, but no. This is like 2025, 2030. And we can see it's about 1.5 degrees centigrade. So you could still grow your crops. Life still continues as normal here. But under RCP 8.5 in 2030, here you have maybe 5 to 7 degrees of warming. This is a violent desert. No more crops being grown here. The Amazon is a dry desert, huge unstoppable fires. The rest of the planet is a baking, violent storms. You can't grow food anywhere in the old areas. Probability ratio of temperature extremes as a function of global warming. And this is from the special report, 1.5 this month. So right now we're at 1 degree centigrade, global mean warming. And what that means is these red lines are record temperatures, record highs, record high temperatures on a daily basis. Right now we have 10 times greater probability of having a record high temperature on any given day. But as we go to 2 degrees, oh look, more psyop, it's right off the chart. It's up here. It's like 50 times higher probability ratio of having record high temperatures every day once we get to 2 degrees warming. So this should frighten everybody, because we do have here at 1 degree, we have a much higher risk of having record high temperatures every day, about 10 times normal. But as we move to 2 degrees warming, it's 50 times higher. And then we're going to shoot right past 2 degrees to where, like every single day is a record high. This is coming unless the ocean iron fertilization is started. And sea level rise. Wow, have they kept this hidden? 1 inch in 4 years, according to IPCC. This is not like decades here. This is a year. So here's 4 years and 2.5 centimeters This is an inch sea level rise in 4 years. What are they keeping this a giant secret or something? So I plotted, we see an upward bend here. So what's happening now? We just had an inch in 4 years. Here's an inch in 3 years, an inch in 2 years. Soon an inch every year, an inch every 6 months, an inch every 3 months, as Greenland and ice and the Antarctic melt rapidly, and the permafrost. Wow. We must stay on the lowest path, the green line, RCP 2.6, to avoid runaway permafrost melting. Why is the permafrost so important? Because it is 25% of the land of the northern hemisphere. And this huge amount of water frozen in this permafrost. Look at this. All of Siberia, most of Russia, the Northwest Territories, Alaska, all of this is going to dump that water, and the amount of carbon dioxide released is absolutely astonishing, along with the methane. So the permafrost soils contain 1,800 gigatons carbon, but to convert to CO2, you have to multiply by 3.67, which is 6,600 gigatons of CO2. Now that amount of carbon is 161 years of our present emissions, because we're emitting 41 gigatons a year. And the Arctic Ocean contains methane. This is very super conservative, 235 gigatons, and much lower than Dr. Shakova estimated. She estimated thousands of gigatons. And multiplying that 235 as a short-term greenhouse gas 100 times worse than CO2 is 23,500 gigatons of CO2 in heating potential. In other words, that's 570 years of present man-made emissions. So as the permafrost and Arctic methane melt, we can expect at least 731 years of equivalent of man-made carbon dioxide to be rapidly vented into the atmosphere over the next few decades. That's game over. This is what Paul Beckwith calls abrupt climate change. Paul Beckwith and I are the only ones calling for ocean iron fertilization as absolutely necessary for human survival, and lots more on the politics in video 2. Once the melting really gets going, there is no stopping it because of multiple positive feedbacks. It will just accelerate and accelerate until all greenhouse gases are released. And that's basically the Venus syndrome, the Paleo-Eocene thermal maximum again. That is the unspoken terror they are trying to hide in the IPCC reports, and the unspoken goal of the hidden bureaucracy at the United Nations. So if the permafrost melts and the methane starts to vent, what would that look like? Here's a YouTube video of Indian Hills 2015 gas eruptions at the south end of Lake Huron, east of Detroit, Michigan. So as the permafrost and Arctic methane warm, this is what we're going to see. We're going to see jets and geysers of methane erupting from carbon-rich soils. In this case, the glaciers had deposited carbon-rich material, and then, at the end of the last ice age, which was then capped over by alluvial clays. And when they built this pond, apparently they weakened that cap. So this is the future. You can see this methane just absolutely shooting like a jet engine into the atmosphere. And this is not a leaky natural gas pipeline. There were no pipelines in this area. So here's Indian Hills Golf Club. And if we zoom in, you can see alluvial clays lay down. Alluvial means flood related. It's washed in by water. Clays laid down over deep ice age carbon rich soils. The reason that's so important is because it's just like the East Siberian Arctic shelf, which contains hundreds to thousands of gigatons of methane, as per the best researcher, Dr. Natalia Shakova. This frozen organic sediment layer, it's half the size of Greenland, and the organic part is up to 20 kilometers thick. Absolutely unbelievable. Scientists know the East Siberian Arctic shelf sediments are melting because they can measure the dissolved minerals, which have doubled in the last 8 years. They can measure the amount of radium very easily and very accurately in the water, which is being released from the unfrozen sediment. 2017, you had a fairly, the unfrozen part was fairly narrow. 8 years later, the unfrozen part has gotten much thicker, and the mixing action is lifting the radium into the air water column where it can be measured. Again, this frozen sediment layer underneath that is 20 kilometers thick, and we don't know how much is frozen. It's this capping layer that is preventing vast jets of methane from entering the atmosphere. And the average depth of the East Siberian Arctic shelf is only about 150 feet. So the loss of ice at the surface of the Arctic will have immediate melting effects over that vast area of methane. For millions of years, soil has been flowing into the Laptev and East Siberian seas, creating huge frozen deposits of subsea organic carbon. It's just like Lake Huron at the end of the last ice age, except it's maybe 100 million times bigger. The Siberian mystery craters near the East Siberian Arctic shelf are caused by melting permafrost and methane gas pressure, just like the Indian Hills Golf Course. Methane gas expansion, not explosion. The expansion released enough energy to throw the overburdened soils to the side. These methane burps can happen multiple times in the same crater as the meltwater melts the permafrost and releases more and more methane. These pingos, or permafrost melt lakes, are forming in large numbers in Siberia and northern Canada, which has the same type of carbon-rich soils like Lake Huron. A new thing that scientists are finally talking about is that as the permafrost melts, not only do you have carbon dioxide and methane released, but nitrous oxide, which is 300 times worse than carbon dioxide. And this is just 2016. Atmospheric methane is rising very fast, higher than it's been in millions of years. And this is old, 2013. We're now at about 2,000 parts per billion, which is only 2 parts per million of methane, and yet look how much heating it causes. And this is an old chart also, but even with only 2 parts per million in the atmosphere, we still have 16% of our greenhouse gas heating is this methane. And the terrible thing is as more methane is vented, like those jets at the golf course, this methane and the N2O nitrous oxide, this wraps around the pie chart, and it will become the majority of this pie chart. You know, the blue right now is how much man is contributing. Well, and the green, forest deforestation, forest fires. But the problem is, as the permafrost melts, these two wrap around, and then mankind's contribution is tiny. Once the methane and nitrous oxide increase, it's game over. It's zero survivability for the average person on this planet. Again, the nitrous oxide is down here. It doesn't look all that scary on this chart, but it stays in the atmosphere a long time. It's a powerful greenhouse gas. And just to show that historically the methane levels are pretty constant, only the carbon dioxide from mankind is this blue and the light blue. This is our contribution. And the nitrous oxide is the purple. You know, these gases here are still fairly contained, but we have to remove the carbon dioxide in an absolute emergency manner. So CO2 is now over 410 parts per million. Nitrous oxide shoots up straight. Methane is going exponential as it inflects and goes vertical. The old freons are still floating around doing a ton of heating, thousands of times worse than CO2. So next time you want to dump your refrigerator and vent the methane, please think about that. So this is from the Assessment Report 5 in 2014 was when it was written. Maximum allowable CO2 emissions. Can you spot the psychological operation here, the mind control? You can't see the current trajectory. This is the path we're actually on, and they want it so that if anybody flips through this report, they see this big curve going down, 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 and people will think, oh, look, we're good. Hey, who's playing on the football game? You know, that's the purpose of this. Keep the sheep calm, but this is the curve that matters. This is their pie in the sky curve. And according to IPCC, in the year 2020, we go to zero carbon emissions, and then we start removing 20-30 gigatons a year. We can only avoid permafrost runaway melting by zero emissions and carbon capture. This is the position of the IPCC scientists. This is the only way we can survive on this planet. Again, back to the, here's RCP 8.5. The Paris Accord estimate is this dot right here, which we already discussed. 54 gigatons in 2030. But with the permafrost and Arctic methane added, we're actually on this curve here. In fact, the Special Report 1.5 this month, they're saying that their current computer models are having us shoot way above the Assessment Report 5 projections. So in 2014, they predicted this green area here for the climate. But we're already zooming past the top of it, heating rapidly. They're saying air temperature will be 1.5 degrees C in about 2022. So this chart here from the IPCC in October 2018 shows that their 2014 Assessment Report 5 was bullshit, as I've been saying and others have been saying. And it's higher than the earlier prediction because of melting, you know. In 2014, Assessment Report 5 deliberately underestimated the speed and severity of global heating because no carbon dioxide, methane, CH4, nitrous oxide, N2O increase from melting permafrost was incorporated into their computer models. There are like 48 computer models, and they didn't model it. They didn't incorporate that feedback. IPCC assumed fast reduction, then zero and negative CO2 emissions in coming decades and built their future curves on that. What a joke. What planet are they talking about? Are they talking about mankind here? Homo sapiens? Because I don't know anybody that's going to park their car, pull the wheels off, put it on cinder blocks, never touch the car again, and go to your main circuit breaker box in your house or your apartment, pull the main breaker, turn it off, and leave it off. How many people are willing to do that? Well, I guarantee you, if people understood how severe the consequences are going to be and how soon it's going to be, there's about probably half of the people on this planet who would do that. Now the 2018 Special Report 1.5 Technical Summary, which was not, it says at the bottom of that technical summary, not for release to the public. Do not quote from this report. Well, if they didn't want anybody quoting from it, why did they release it to the public? So that shows the conflict between the scientists trying to ring the alarm bell and the bureaucrats trying to keep the sheep calm. So that technical summary report says permafrost melting requires an additional 100 gigatons of adjustment to the total CO2 budget. CO2 budget is how much carbon we can release before we hit that 2 degrees doomsday heating. This is the first time IPCC has ever put a number on melting permafrost, and it's a big number, 100 gigatons, but just to token number. So they say the remaining budget's carbon dioxide budget would be approximately 100 gigatons carbon dioxide lower to account for permafrost thawing and potential methane release from wetlands in the future. First time ever they have mentioned melting permafrost and put a number on it. And that is not supposed to be released for public consumption. So Sam Karana at ArcticNewsBlogspot.com has done excellent work. All of his predictions have panned out. This is what he's predicting for future temperatures. And you can see 2020, we hit the runaway point. So ocean iron fertilization has got to start before the end of 2020. And I've been saying this for 5 years, and now finally IPCC is agreeing that 2020, we've got to actually go to zero and have negative emissions. Negative emissions can only be accomplished with ocean iron fertilization. IPCC, a special report this month, says this orange area is the amount of CO2 that has to be removed from the atmosphere every year. It's up to 30 gigatons to bring the net emissions along this red line here. This is our only path of survival, is removing this much. So how do the billionaires plan to remove 30 gigatons of CO2 every year from the atmosphere? Well, Bill Gates and the famous geoengineer David Keith are planning to convert, with their startup company Carbon Engineering, air to fuels trademark. So they pull CO2 from the atmosphere, and look, wow, they've made like a half a pint of fuel here. Wow, we're well on our way, aren't we? If air to fuel CO2 becomes possible, what will it cost to capture a ton of CO2? And I think this was David Keith saying back in 2009, it's several $100s a ton now. They're hoping to get it down to $100 a ton someday. Great, so all we need is 50 million of these plants built in the next 2 years, and megawatt solar power stations to power each one, and no chemtrails blocking the solar light so that we actually get some power from the solar panels. Wait a minute, just how many centuries will all of this take? This is an artist's impression of this carbon dioxide absorber. Very, very tiny part of this. Here's what the plant really looks like after 7 years of research and millions of dollars of investment. Now this to me looks like a psyop. The fossil fuel companies have always been able to say, oh, well, we're working on carbon dioxide direct capture from the air. Don't worry about it. Keep burning your oil. Go buy an SUV, whatever. We want to burn the rest of this coal because it's available. This is a psyop, folks. So it takes a ton of technology, a complex industrial process to capture CO2 and turn it into fuel. And the only problem is it needs a crap load of natural gas or huge amounts of electricity and giant steel facilities to do that. Wait a minute. It doesn't remove CO2 from the atmosphere since it is burned after it is captured and synthesized into fuel. So what's the use? It's just another trick to delay meaningful action on greenhouse gas emissions. Air-to-fuel plants cannot remove CO2 permanently from the air. Never mind. How about the very smart and not corrupt engineers in Europe? What technology are they planning to use for carbon dioxide capture? Here's a Swiss company is the first in the world to build a commercial carbon dioxide capture facility that runs on waste heat from an incinerator and feeds the carbon dioxide to a greenhouse near Zurich, Switzerland, Climeworks. This plant captures 1,000 tons of CO2 per year at a cost of $600 a ton. At large scale, the cost should be around $200 a ton. Great, so to capture, say, 30 gigatons, how many of these plants are needed? I had to get a calculator with more digits to actually figure this out. The answer, 30 million of these plants will be needed in the next few years at an operating cost of $6 trillion per year. That's not including the construction cost. So we need 30 million of these to be built over the next 2 years if we want to survive. Nope, it ain't going to happen. With all due respect to these excellent Swiss engineers. After carbon dioxide is captured, what do the billionaires plan to do with it? Deep well injection, of course. So you can see they're going to just take all that CO2 out of the atmosphere and inject it down deep into the earth. Why do the IPCC and all paid scientists only focus on deep well injection and totally ignore ocean iron fertilization? Simple, because the experts in pipelines, deep land drilling, offshore well drilling, offshore well platforms, fluid pumping over long distance, etc., are the oil companies, and they already own the deep wells to begin with. The oil companies want to make damn sure when they are not allowed to extract any more oil, gas, or coal, they are the ones who will make billions and trillions of dollars by getting paid for CO2 deep well injection. After paying them to extract 1,000 billion tons of CO2 from the ground, now we have to pay them even more to pump it back into the ground. They call it business, but I call it the world's worst and deadliest scam. How do the billionaires control what the IPCC reports say? Easy. It has to do with the review process for every IPCC report. Every IPCC report is written by appointed experts, is reviewed several times by other appointed experts, then reviewed over and over to get final approval by government and even more appointed experts. It takes 7 years to write one report. And incidentally, the Assessment Report 5 was 3,200 pages of very highly packed information. That's why nobody looks at it, nobody understands it, nobody can read it, pretty much. Who controls each government that is doing all this reviewing over and over and over? The wealthiest families in each country are the owners of the oil companies and the financial institutions. Much more on this system of corruption in the second video on ocean iron fertilization. So, carbon dioxide injection into deep wells, what's the latest on this technology? Will it work? Now, this paper was written in 2009 for the Society of Petroleum Engineers by two petroleum engineer professors, University of Houston, Texas A&M, sequestering carbon dioxide in a closed underground volume. What they found was a direct injection of CO2 will require 5 to 20 times more underground reservoir than has been previously planned, and it renders geologic sequestration of carbon dioxide a profoundly non-feasible option for the management of CO2 emissions. Let me clue you in on engineering speak. If you ever hear an engineer say the words profoundly non-feasible, he's basically saying with exclamation points, it's impossible, it cannot be done, it will never be done, it will never work. So they concluded that a 30 million watt, 30 megawatt coal burning power plant would require so many deep injection wells, maybe like half the size of Ohio, that it is not a practical means to provide any substantive reduction in CO2 emissions. The billionaires want the IPCC to only talk about CO2 sequestration in deep wells, since there will be billions and trillions to be made. And here they have the nerve to say the cost of carbon sequestration via pipeline is $24 a ton, and for tankers $39 a ton to do it in the ocean. Of course, the real cost will be 5, 10, 20, 50 times higher, and the carbon credits, the CO2 tax, their compensation, their pay, will go up and up and up. This is just a typical bait and switch to lure the public into making a commitment to, and then once they're on that, once they sign the contract to buy, that price will skyrocket, I guarantee. CO2 injection is such a bad idea. 4 years after that first report in 2009, Massachusetts Institute of Technology's research program was canceled. Here they were planning to pipe carbon dioxide 140 kilometers to onshore deep saline aquifers. So this would just be like fracking, only with carbon dioxide instead of water. And boy, sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? But it was canceled. It was going to start in 2017, but it was canceled in 2013 due to lack of funding. Even after they'd already spent 180 million euros on the program, they just dropped it. Amazing. So 30 gigatons removal of existing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is impossible using man-made technology. Let me repeat that. It's impossible using man-made technology. And that is the only way we're going to survive. There are not enough deep wells or pipelines or ships to inject CO2 into the deep wells or subsea reservoirs, which is prohibited by the United Nations anyway. They're not going to let people, oil companies, inject carbon dioxide at the bottom of the ocean. What is the alternative? What would it cost to sequester a ton of CO2 with this alternative? Ocean iron fertilization could sequester gigatons of CO2 each year into the cold, deep polar oceans for less than $2 a ton. The importance of carbon sinks, back in 1750, before the Industrial Revolution. It was really cold back then, 280 parts per million carbon dioxide. And since then, we've added 86 parts per million by burning coal, 64 by burning oil, 26 by burning natural gas. Making cement added 5 parts per million. Converting land to subdivisions and clear cutting has liberated 76 parts per million CO2 into the atmosphere. But the land has also absorbed 68 parts per million, so now we're going back down. Look at this. The CO2 has dropped by 76 parts per million because of the ocean. And this can easily be increased by adding trace amounts of iron to the Antarctic southern oceans. And this 393, this is really old. We're at 410 now. Absolutely, we are going to skyrocket to 450, 500, 600, 900, unless ocean iron fertilization is begun very quickly. So in 2014, they gave these numbers here. Don't ask me why it doesn't match the other numbers, but this is IPCC. So coming out into the atmosphere, we're burning fossil fuels. That's 8. Going up, land use change is 1. So we have 9 billion tons of flux of added carbon. So to get CO2 multiplied by 3.67, and you have 2.5 going down into the land, 2.5 going down into the ocean. So 9 minus 5 equals 4 gigatons of carbon added to the atmosphere every year. So here's just some disinformation from the IPCC. It's not flux, it's ocean absorption. Anytime IPCC talks about the oceans absorbing CO2, you get this disinformation. Again, it's petagrams. Why is this data 13 years old? This is 2018. Why are they presenting us with data that's so old? Measuring the carbon instead of carbon dioxide, which is 3.66 times higher. So there's 8 gigatons of CO2 being absorbed by the oceans, even back then. So even with no fertilization and 98% of the whales killed, the oceans are already absorbing 8 gigatons of CO2. Remember, we only need to remove 30 gigatons per year to save everything and everyone. This is the end of Ocean Iron Fertilization Truth About Global Warming Part 1. Please watch the next video. Uh, this has been really gloomy information so far, but the second video will cheer you up. Did you really make it to the end and understand most of it? Yes, good on you, mate.